fans, each and every week, man, we try to bring you a little history, coach you guys up on some American history, give you an idea of what happened in the past before us. May 4th, 1897, J.W. Smith receives the patent for the lawn sprinkler.
Mm,
Cleveland, the lawn sprinkler. That was the news to me. I ain't heard that one before.
that's huge.
Yeah, the lawn sprinkler, boy. May 2nd, 1920, the first game of the National Negro Baseball League was played in Indianapolis. Cleveland, May 1st, 1946, former federal judge William H. Hasty confirmed as governor of Virgin Islands, making him the only African American to govern a U.S. state or territory since Reconstruction.
Mm.
Interesting, Cleveland. Are you familiar with Reconstruction? Do you know what Reconstruction is? It's interesting how they use these terms. Reconstruction. Do you know what Reconstruction is?
Not in its literal sense. What are you referring to?
Reconstruction, Cleveland, is when after this they came and claimed the United States, and they claimed that they start basically stole the land from the Indians, right? The Europeans did, settlers. But then they called Reconstruction the time when they got here in the 1800s to kind of restructure all the and pass out all the lands to make it actually America. So now they formed the 13 colonies, right? They formed the different states in the union, if you will, and they consider that Reconstruction. Again, through slave labor, they built up this country, and they refer to it as Reconstruction from when they after they stole the land from the indigenous people, the Indians. Then they had to reconstruct it to make it America what it is today, or not what it
Oh,
is
so
today.
so that correlates with Manifest Destiny, and then the Louisiana Purchase, and then the Mexican Cession. So it's all kind of gotcha.
Yeah. So all that is kind of the Reconstruction when they just pillage the land, basically. But it's just how it's termed Reconstruction. the term
Yeah, I
Reconstruction.
always thought it was kind of a Southern thing, but I was like, I didn't really want to dig too deep into it. It's like, okay, yeah.
So Cleveland, on that topic, man, I hate fans. This is not the purpose of the show. It's not the purpose of the show to give you guys. I want to give you a history lesson on some points. That's why I do this week in history, so we can discuss a point or two, a topic. Just look back and see what has happened in our history, and some of the things I found it intriguing that kind of make it what it is today. But I don't really want to go into a history lesson, but I will for this moment. Yeah, it's all of that, Cleveland. It's all of that, and it goes way back to how nasty things were when this country started, because that was pre Jim Crow. Jim Crow era lasted through Reconstruction, and we've touched on this a couple times. HBCUs were started in 1890, Cleveland, but they're so underfunded they didn't get the funding that was earmarked for colleges and universities back in 1862, when the Morrill Act was first signed. Okay, they didn't sign the Morrill Act the Morrill Act in 1862 didn't include black folks. Did not include black people, believe it or not, in 1862. Then they said, hold up, this is somebody raised their hand and created a stink and said, no, this needs to include, because it's unfair, because now blacks don't have nowhere to go to school. They really didn't want them to go to school anyway, but that's what happened. That's when in 1890 they revised the Morrill Act, starting the original 19 HBCUs, right? That started back in 1890. So you'll hear a lot of them refer to 1890 was our birth date. But they were starved of the funding that the schools were getting for 30 years before HBCUs were allowed to convene and get educated. This was still 70 years, Cleveland, before the Civil Rights Act, when black people had to fight for their right to vote. Literally just had to fight for their right to vote. And then, not to mention the redlining that went on, not to mention the funding, the loan funding that blacks weren't able to get, and a whole host of stuff that was just unequal, uneven. So when you hear people today talk about, that's not fair. Well, come on, what's fair? what are you talking about? What's fair? But it goes deep. And Cleveland, you and I both from the Northwest, Cleveland. Just being down here in the South is like, it's not, I wouldn't say commonplace. It's not the word I intend to use. But it's a lot more relevant and reflective down here. Like you see that actually just being here in historical events took place. You see that shit wasn't happening up there. If there was some white person didn't like you, they went the other way. That was it. That was the racism we dealt with. They go the other way. But the racism down here is a lot different. I just want to say that, man. I'm sorry, fans. I'm sorry. I know I lost some fans right there, but just want to give you guys a little bit of history, the history that I'm experiencing. Cleveland, May 3rd, 1948. The Supreme Court ruled. Another example. The Supreme Court ruled in Shelley versus Kramer that federal states could not enforce restrictive covenants which bar persons from owning and occupying property because of their race. The Supreme Court, Cleveland, ruled the federal and state courts could not enforce restrictive covenants which bar persons from owning or occupying property because of the race. Cleveland, this was 1948. We just talked about some of the Reconstruction era. Okay, this is 50 years after the 1890 revision of the Morrill Act, which allowed blacks to go to school. That's so amazing. It's so amazing. I'm sorry. This show wasn't supposed to be about racism, but I just picked up some of these just some of these tidbits. Cleveland, May 3rd, 1961. 13 Freedom Riders began their bus trips through southern United States. So the Freedom Riders, everybody knows what the Freedom Rider was. The buses getting burned up. You know, black and white people getting killed and destroyed on those buses. But that was 1961.